it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the Hello Bluebird Tree Neighbors stamp set. So I've stamped my images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with this amazing tall tree. It's going to be a slimline card today to make sure that I fit the entire thing on a card. So the colors I chose for that are E51, E53, E55, and E57. So the first thing I'm going to do is take that E57 and outline the right hand side of the tree. I want to make it look nice and rounded, so I'm putting a dark shadow there. I'm also going to put a shadow down toward the bottom of the tree, and I'm going to outline all of the little holes that the critters are going to live inside in a little bit. And just kind of tracing like the outer ring around there. There's kind of two rings drawn there, so I'm just doing the outer one at this point. I'm also going to go over all of the lines that are drawn into the tree so that I can create those nice grooves. It's going to help this tree look really textured like tree bark is. So I'm just continuing to kind of go over those. I'm not being too particular. If they're not exact, that's totally fine. Just, kind of moving quickly and making sure that I have those dark areas. Once I have that E57 all laid in, I'm going to grab the E55 and begin to blend that out. So I'm going to go right over the edge of that E57 and soften that up, and I forgot to do the shadow at the top of the tree there, so I just went back and grabbed my E57 and put that back in, and then I'll trace over the edge of all of the grooves. I'm going to fill in right up to the inner part of that circle for those little burrows with that E55 and just continue adding that texture to the tree. So once I'm finished laying in the E55, I had meant to go down to the E53, but I accidentally grabbed the wrong marker and ended up blending out the entire tree with the E51. But I am going to do 2 extra layers off screen just because it's such a large image. I felt like it really needed a lot more blending, and it's totally fine if you leave it because tree bark should have more texture to it. It doesn't need to be blended out perfectly, but in this case I felt like there was a little bit of inconsistency because I skipped over that E53, so I wanted to get that back in there. So I did a second layer, felt like it still wasn't quite as dark as I wanted it to be, so then I did a third layer off screen as well, and you'll see what that looks like in just a bit. So I'm just going to fill in the last of these little holes there, and then for the inner part of the hole, I'm going to start with the E53 and create a little ring there. I'm going to make it get a little bit lighter as we get further back. Most of this isn't going to show in the final card anyway because the critters will be in front of it, but I just decided to go a little bit lighter to kind of accent them. So I used the E51 to bring that color toward the center, and then I felt like it needed one more shade lighter, so I grabbed the E50 and just filled in those circles. So now you're going to see how that tree looks after 2 more layers. It's quite a bit darker, but like I said, I was a lot happier with it this way. So now moving on to the fox, and I'm using my favorite combo for foxes, which is YR12, YR14, and YR18. I'm using the YR18 first to add some shadow down the back side of his body and also on the underside of his tail and on the underside of his arm as well. And then I also went back and added a little bit of shading right above his muzzle. And then I'm going to grab the YR14 and begin to blend that out. So I'm just making sure to color right over the very edge of that YR18. Just grab the very edge of that and pull that color into the mid-tone. I don't want to color over it completely because that would break it up. I just want to go over the very edge so that only the edge is broken up, so I get that nice blend. And then I'll come in with the YR12 and fill in the rest of that area that I want to be orange. I'm going to keep his face white, and I also left just the tiniest sliver of a white belly. And then before I put those markers away, I did want to use them to color in the owl's beak and feet. So I added just a sliver of that YR18, blended out with the YR14, and then just a touch of that YR12 to finish that off. Then for the whites of the fox's body, I'm going to use some pale oranges. It's YR000 and YR00. So I'm just adding a touch of that in the white areas, and I'm going to blend it out and leave most of it white there. I don't want to cover it all up. So now I decided to zoom in a little bit closer to color the rest of my critters. I was realizing it was probably a little bit too far back for you guys, but now you can't see the marker caps. I will realize that in a little bit and start putting them down a little bit lower, but all I did was add in the YR01 to that combo, and I'm going to do the little opossum's tail and the inner parts of his ear and his little feet and paws, and also his muzzle. And then you can see I stamped the other part of his tail off to the side. That is a separate stamp so that you can layer that on the front of the tree and make it look like his tail is really wrapped around it, which I'll show you guys later on when we do the assembly. But I just blended that out with all of those shades and went back with the YR01 to just darken things up a bit. I'm also going to add some color to the inside of the bunny's ears with those shades. So just using that same exact combo, the YR00 and the YR000. And then I'm moving on to the rest of my opossum, and the colors I'm using for that are T0, T1, and T3. I was going back and forth between the warm grays and the cool grays, and then finally just decided to use the toner grays because they're kind of in the middle to me. So I started with that T3 and added in some shadow, and then I'm going to blend that out with the T1, still sticking close to the edge of his body because I do want to leave a little white belly on him as well. So I'm just making sure to blend that out nicely and also go over some of that kind of peachy tone that I've done to just integrate it more into his body and make it look more natural. So then I have that T0, and I'm going to fill almost all of the rest of him in except for that little area on his belly like I said. And then I went back with my T3 marker and added a bit of dot detail to him just to help him look a little bit more fuzzy, give him some texture. So now I'm going to move my markers down. I realized that you couldn't see the caps, so I'm going to use E15, E17, and E18 for my little squirrel. He has the little perky ears like the red squirrels that I love so much from when we lived in Germany. So I'm going to color him with the, typical red squirrel shades that I like to use. The only addition is that I have swapped the E18 for the E19. Usually I use the E19, but I just got the E18 and decided to try it out, and I did really like it with this combo. And so I used the E18 first, blended out with the E17. Now I'm coming in with that E15 and coloring him almost all the way up. The only thing I'm leaving is his muzzle and his paws and a little sliver at the top of his tail. And for that, I'm going to bring in the E13 and just finish him up there. For the bunny, I decided to use some warm grays, and I'm using W00 and W1 as I want him to look like a very pale gray or white bunny. So I used that W1 first and added a little shadow above the muzzle to kind of push that forward. And then I'm blending out with the W00 and letting that fade into the white. And then I'll move up to my owl, and for him I'm going to use E70, E71, and E74 on the outer parts of the body, starting with the E74, and I put a little shadow at the top of his wings and also on the sides of his head and also in the little divot that's like right above his eyes. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E71. And then I'll come in with the E70 and fill the rest of that in. I did do some dot detail on him as well to help him look fuzzy. And then for the rest of his body, I'm going to use E40, E41, and E42. So I did the E42 first, added a little shadow on the outer edge and above his beak and also below his head. And then blend it out with the E41 and then the E40, also doing that kind of dot motion to just creates like a fuzzy look. So I'm moving on to my little bird, and I wanted to make it a bluebird because I thought it would be fun to have a pop of bright color in the mix of all this neutral. So I chose B00, B02, and B04. Started with the B04, blended out with the B02, then I used the B00, and then I left the breast blank, brought in the R11 and R20. I'm going to add a little rosy cheek, and I'll color in his breasts with those shades. And then I'm going to do some rosy cheeks and also the insides of the ears on some of the critters. I just went right over the peachy shades that I'd already done because I wanted them to be a bit more pink. So I used the R20 for that and then just blended out with the R11. For the cheeks, I just used the R20 first, do a little oval, and then trace around the edges of that with the R11. And it just kind of softens everything up and gets that color to disperse into the rest of it. So now I'm going to do the leaves on the trees, and originally I pulled out Y02, YG23, and YG25. I wanted kind of like leaves that were turning to yellow, not quite there, still kind of green. But the YG23 and the YG02, they just didn't blend well enough for me. So I took away the YG23 and I'm going to add in the YG08 instead. And that one is much brighter, but the other one was already oversaturated, so I'm going to leave that to dry. Instead, I'm going to move on to this other leaf. I'll use the YG25 at one end, the YG08 at the other end, and blend the transition between the two with the YG02. The YG08 and the YG02 are also new to me markers. I got those in the same order with the E18, and I'm really liking them. They're a really pure yellow instead of kind of like an orangey toned yellow like the Y15, Y17 that I typically use. So once that other leaf had dried, I just went back and added a bit more of that Y08 in there. And then I took the BG10 and outlined the inside of the speech bubble just to give it a bit more dimension. And then I'm going to grab my black Sakura jelly roll pen and try to get that started off to the side because I want it to be flowing nicely. It likes to get dried up, and then it doesn't really color nicely, and you can get some weird shaped eyeballs. So I got to make sure that it's flowing, and then I'll just kind of dot that over the eyes. It just makes them really bright and shiny, brings those critters back to life again. So I did that on all of them. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dyes. For my background, I'm taking some spun sugar Distress Oxide ink and blending it onto a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy stencil. So I'm going to blend that up at the very top, and then I'm going to turn that stencil to get a different cloud formation and blend a little bit more of that spun sugar on there. And then I'm going to grab some orange Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to use Carved Pumpkin, which is a lighter orange, and just add a touch of that to that cloud formation, and then blend that out with the spun sugar as well. I kind of want it to transition from shade to shade. So on this next one, I'm going to go in darker with that Carved Pumpkin and then blend that out with a little bit of the spun sugar. So it kind of transitions from pink to orange, and then we're going to go down into yellow eventually. But I'm going to do that Carved Pumpkin one more time, and now this time I'm going to grab Squeeze Lemonade and blend that out a bit. So we're working our way down into that sunrise. So then I'll go down with the Squeeze Lemonade all by itself. And then I was checking to see if I'd gone down far enough on that panel, but decided to do one more cloud formation. And then I just added a little bit more of that yellow down at the bottom so it isn't so stark white. And then I'm going to move on to my grassy pieces. For that, I'm using the Grassy Knolls dies from Hello Bluebird. And I'm going to start with some Twisted Citron at the top of each of these panels. And I'm going to bring that down toward the bottom, a little bit more than halfway, I would say. I wanted it to be kind of like an autumnal vibe. I didn't want too bright green, so I decided to mix that in with a little bit of that Squeeze Lemonade to kind of yellow it up and make it look more like fall. But it still just wasn't quite dark enough for me. I didn't feel like there was enough definition at the top edge. So I did add some more of that Twisted Citron, but ultimately decided I needed just a touch of Mowed Lawn at the top. I'm not going to even blend it out, but I just needed a little more definition on the grassy portion at the top. I decided to do some splatter details, so I'm going to press both of those green inks onto an acrylic block, add a little bit of water between the two of them, and then I'll mix that up with the lighter color first and flick that onto those grassy panels, and then I'll add some of the darker shade as well. I'll set those aside to dry, and I'm going to go back to my cloudy panel because I decided I wanted to do some on there as well. So I'm going to do the pink first, just so I don't kind of mix my colors too much. And then I added the yellow, and then I went in and splattered some of the orange on there as well. So then I'm going to let all of that dry, and once it has, I'm ready to start putting this panel together. I'm going to take the taller of the grassy borders and glue that down to the bottom of my panel. And it wasn't cut quite to the right side, but I just made sure that it was lined up correctly on the right, because I'm going to have to trim off some of the left-hand side to get rid of the edge of the tree anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and just make everything flush with the right side and then worry about that later. But now I'm going to grab those 3 tree centers, make sure that I have the right ones for each of those trees, and then I'm going to glue those in. Right now that tree is not attached, I'm just fitting them in there and holding that in place so that I make sure that I get everything spaced correctly, so that when I add that tree later on, those little burrows will be in the right place. So I'm going to add this last one using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, which has that super fine nozzle. I really, really love it. Thank you guys so much for suggesting that to me a while back when I asked for a fine tipped nozzle glue. So I'm going to pull that tree off and add some foam tape to the back of it. And then I'm going to trace around those holes with an E53 marker, just so that if there's any little bit showing between the edges when you tip the tree, you won't see that sky through the background. So I'm going to peel off the release papers from all of the little bits of foam tape, and then I'm going to line that up where I want it and have that hang over the left-hand side like I said. And then I'll grab my Cutter Bee scissors. These are the Teflon coated scissors. I absolutely love them. These were the first craft supply that I got like almost 11 years ago now when I first started crafting. These were a gift from my husband. It was my very first tool, and I still love them to this day. It's the same exact pair I've been using all these years, and they still work amazing. So I'm going to take the second grassy border and just pop that up in front of the tree. And then before I get any further, I wanted to finish off the inside of my card. So I grabbed the Leaf Play stamp set and I chose a couple of the images and the sentiment. I'm stamping that down on a snow cone card base that I've scored and folded to a Slimline card. And I'm stamping with Lawn Fawn Peacock ink. So now that that is done, I'm ready to adhere my focal panel to my card front. So the card base measures 8.5 by 3.5, and I trimmed that focal panel down to be just a 1/4 of an inch smaller, so I get a little bit of that blue border on the outside edges. And now I'm ready to begin adhering my images. I've added foam tape to the backs of them, and I'm going to just start staging my little scene here. The owl is going to go way up at the top in that little burrow, and then in the center one I'm going to have the little red squirrel, and then for the bottom one I'm going to have the bunny. I figured he wouldn't go too high up in that tree, so I figured the lowest one to the ground was going to be the place for him. Then I'm going to take the opossum and get that lined up on the tree where I want it. I'm going to glue that down into place. You could tuck the bottom of his tail, or the top of his tail I should say, under the tree, but since mine was already popped up, I just cut it off and then added the little part that is going to go over the tree so it truly looks like it's wrapped around. Then I'll take the little bluebird, and I've added foam tape to the back of him as well, but I'm going to use liquid glue where his feet go just to make sure that they are securely on that tree. And then I'll do the same for the little fox. So he's mostly got foam tape, but I'm going to use a little liquid glue where his feet are going to overlap that grassy border. I was trying to decide whether to put him on top or to tuck him behind, but decided to put him on top. I thought it looked cuter. And then I just have my sentiment that I'm going to put right above him, and the 2 falling leaves, which I'm going to have kind of coming down from where the opossum is attached. So I just put those at a little bit of an angle, and I decided not to go with any stickles or anything. I decided I just wanted the coloring to really stand out on this one, and also that really pretty sunrise background or sunset, whatever you want it to be. This was my favorite set of the new Hello Bluebird release, so I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I have lots more Hello Bluebird content coming. If you'd like to check out these products, you'll find them listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.